Hi, Julie here to tell you all about Insights Explore. It's a tool produced by the Insights company, who also produce Insights Discovery, which some of you may have experienced before. Insights Explore is a newer tool. It's online, but it's still very much about something called color energies. If you haven't come across those before, no problem. The purpose of this short introductory video is to tell you a bit more about them and how you can use them to understand more about yourself, understand more about others and their behaviors, and why maybe they do the things the way they do, which might be very similar to how you go about doing things, might be very different. It also allows us to think about what we can do to adapt our own behaviors in order to connect more successfully with others. So when we get together in the workshop, we're going to be using your Color Energies profile that you will receive via your Explore app in order to do those things, to think about where we want to perhaps dial up certain behaviors, dial down other behaviors to make better connections with others. And during that workshop, we'll be doing lots of action planning of how perhaps you can use this knowledge of color energies, your own and others, to help you with all the things that you are tasked with at work. So I should explain that I am an Insights practitioner, which means that I've undergone quite rigorous training in order to be accredited to use these tools. So hopefully you'll feel in safe hands. And what I'm going to do now is just take you through the background to the tool and give you some information on kind of how it works and how you're going to be able to interpret the results that it gives you. Before I do that, though, I'm going to take you through the stages that are involved before we all find ourselves at the workshop. So here you are at the start of the programme, watching this short introductory video. As per the joining instructions that you should have received, you'll soon be invited to access the Insights Explore app. Your invite will look like this and will come from the Insights email address shown. When you click on Let's Go, you'll be invited to complete a 16-question evaluator. Read all the 4 statements and decide which one sounds most like you. For me, it was that I'm cheerful, hearty and lively. So I've selected M, that's most like me. Then decide which of the statements sounds least like you. You can see here, I've chosen least, as I am very forgiving. For the other statements that you've not chosen as most or least like you, give them a score between 1 and 5. As you can see, I've given a score of 5 to being driven by strong willpower, because that's very much like me. But I've given a score of 2 to making good use of evidence, because that's less like me. When you've done the same for all 16 questions in the evaluator, you'll be advised that you now have a Color Energies profile, which you can visit by clicking on the menu item shown. Once you've got your Color Energies profile, it's time to turn to your workbook, which was sent to you in the joining instructions. The workbook contains lots of questions to help you explore your own behavioural preferences and how they play out at work. It also gets you to start thinking about other people's preferences and whether they're the same or different to yours. Please make lots of notes as you go through and bring your completed workbook along to the workshop. Okay, so now you know the steps leading up to the workshop and what's required in order to obtain your own Color Energies profile. It's time to talk a bit more about what this Color Energies thing is all about and where it comes from. And we're going to start by looking at perception. The ladder of perception shown here helps to explain how 2 people can witness the exact same events and yet perceive it very differently. How we perceive events informs the actions that we end up taking, the behaviors that other people can observe in us. So we start with an event as the camera would capture it, the objective, the actual real truth of the event. But then each of us attends only to selected data within that event. And that's where the perception is formed. And then based on the data that we select, we make value judgments based on that data. And we then give interpretations and meanings to those value judgments. And then we draw conclusions, not based on the original event, but based on our version of the event that's been shaped by our perceptions and our judgments and the interpretations and the meanings that we've given to that event. And depending on the logical conclusions that we draw, we may have very different emotional and physical responses to that event from the person stood next to us who has objectively observed the same thing. We then form beliefs based on those events. And because of those beliefs, we act in a particular way. It sounds as though this might take some time, but in reality, this ladder of perception happens instantaneously and subconsciously. So we're not even aware we're doing it. All we become aware of is the actions that we observe in ourselves or in others. Let's have a look at this using a real example. I'm going to leave this slide up for a few seconds, and I'd like you to write down your answers to the questions. So, hands up. Who thought I was crazy when I said there was a young lady in the picture? And who thought I was going mad when I said there was an older woman in the picture? Which did you see? And what can you see now? Perhaps now you can see both. Can you see that there is a young lady? She's got a feather in her hair and she's looking away from us. If you change your perspective, you can also perhaps see an old lady. Some people describe her as a witch with a big crooked nose and a pointed chin with a scarf over her head. Regardless of which you saw first, both images are there. So both responses are correct. But depending on who you saw first, I'm guessing that how you would choose to approach them would differ. So can you see what we mean about perception? That we can all be presented with exactly the same situation, but perceive it very differently. So accepting that we all perceive the world differently is one thing, but how do we explain why? This is when we turn to the work of Carl Jung, and particularly his work around psychological types. As you can see on the slide here, Jung identified 3 sets of behavioural preferences: introversion and extroversion, thinking and feeling, sensing and intuition. Introversion, extroversion is all about how we orient ourselves towards the world. Thinking and feeling is about how we make decisions. And sensing and intuition is all about how we take in and process information in the world. So let's look at Jung's first set of behavioural preferences, introversion or extroversion. There's something really key to note here. This is about preference, not about ability. So as we go on, you'll discover that we have the ability to behave in this instance, both introverted and extroverted ways. But Jung determined that we have an instinctive preference for one or the other in each of these sets of preferences. With regards to introversion and extroversion, it's all around our instinctive preference for how we orient ourselves to the world, whether it's in more of an introverted way or more of an extroverted way. As with all of the preferences, introversion and extroversion sit on a continuum. So our preference for one or the other may be fairly extreme. We may sit at the far end of the continuum of introversion, or we may have a milder preference so that we find we sit somewhere closer to the center. So on to Jung's second set of behavioral preferences, the decision-making functions of thinking and feeling. He referred to these as the rational functions. And thinking and feeling help us to evaluate and to make judgments. As you can see on the slide, the thinking function is all about logical thinking, that logical thinking process that helps us to develop thoughts using knowledge and objective facts. It's the function that helps us to analyze, to think critically, to draw conclusions. People who have a preference for the thinking function tend to be more task focused. We use the feeling function to form more of a subjective judgment and make decisions based on our personal values and consideration of who's likely to be affected by the decision we're about to make. When we categorize something as good, bad, appropriate, inappropriate, liked, disliked, we're typically using that feeling function. And people with a preference for feeling over thinking tend to be more people focused. Okay, and on to Jung's third set of behavioural preferences, sensing and intuition. Now, this is all about the type of information we more naturally gravitate towards and how we make use of that information. People with a preference for sensation tend to gravitate towards information that exists in the here and now. The information that they can experience using their five senses. So typically, they are more attuned to information that is practical, factual, specific and logical, maybe following things through step by step. If I were to show someone with a preference for sensing, Edvard Munch's painting The Scream, the chances are they would initially be drawn to describing what they could see in the picture. So the colours, the positioning of the character, the bridge, maybe the type of weather that is going on in the painting. If I were to ask someone with a preference for intuition to describe the same painting, the chances are that their initial reaction would be quite different. They might be more likely to talk about the feelings that the painting evokes. They might talk about the anguish or the despair. By now, you might be thinking, this is all well and good, Julie, but what on earth has this got to do with these colour energies that you keep talking about? Well, colour energies provides us with a really simple and easy to remember way of describing people's behavioural preferences. And so the colour energies are made up of interactions between the attitude preferences and the decision-making preferences. So we talk of 4 different colour energies. Let's start with fiery red. Fiery red is a combination of a preference for extroversion and thinking. Working around the wheel, we then have sunshine yellow. And sunshine yellow, as you can see, is a combination of the preferences for extroversion, but this time with feeling rather than thinking. Further around, we have earth green. Earth green is a combination of the preference for feeling, So it shares that in common with Sunshine Yellow. But the preference here is for introversion rather than extroversion. And then we have Cool Blue, which is a combination, as you can see, of, that's right, thinking and introversion. The alert amongst you might be wondering where sensing and intuition turn up in these colour energies. Well, sensing and intuition occur in each of the colour energies. And depending on whether your preference is for sensing or for intuition, the way in which your colour energy plays out will be slightly different. So it's over to you now. We've given you some background, some information on the theory underpinning the Insights Explorer tool. So hopefully you feel that it has some credibility and it's worth having a go with. So it's over to you to complete the evaluator, to answer each of those 16 evaluator questions, which will reveal your own set of behavioural preferences in the form of your own colour energies profile. So it's time to log in to access the app and follow the simple instructions that you'll be given on the screen. Once you've completed and you've accessed your personal profile, turn to your workbook and work through the questions to help you explore your behavioural preferences and the way in which they may be playing out at work. Please trust the process. Your personality preferences are going to play out as we go through the programme. So it will be interesting to see which of you are the detail conscious, wanting to understand everything before you begin, and those of you who are just jumping in with both feet and giving it a go. But if you follow the steps, the instructions provided, we're pretty sure you're going to get a lot of value out of it. Thanks for spending this time with me. I hope it's given you a good introduction to the tool that we'll be using at the workshop. If you've got any questions, drop me a line. I'll be happy to answer them. But I would just encourage you to crack on, answer those evaluator questions, get your colour energies profile, and then let's start sharing all that information when we meet together soon.